Rhody Strength podcast is now brought to you by Rob Levine, the heavy hitter. We've been really happy to have them jump on as a sponsor. I personally used them this past year. My wife was in a car accident, and they were able to help us along every step of the way through getting properly compensated, making sure we weren't getting taken advantage of by the car insurance companies, and helping through with medical payments. So if you've been in a car accident, it's definitely worthwhile. Just pick up the phone and see how they can help. The Rhody Strength podcast is now sponsored by Athletic Painting and Carpentry. For all of your exterior painting, interior painting, cabinet and door resurfacing, cabinet installation, cabinet remodel, floor refinishing, carpentry, lead renovation, and power washing needs. Give them a call at 401-675-7973. Follow them on Instagram at athletic_painting_, and follow them on Facebook at Athletic Painting and Carpentry. They are an honest, local Rhode Island company that does great work. What's going on, guys? Dr. Matt here, host of the Rhody Strength podcast. Got another special guest on today, Travis Cooper. What's going on, man?
Oh, not too much. How are you doing?
Doing good. It's not to date the episode, but it's July 5th, so just had some fireworks and maybe some barbecue stuff yesterday, or just hanging out.
Yeah. For me, I just hung out with the kids. We went to the beach a little bit. It's
Nice.
the perks of living in a beach town. But tonight we're actually going to go see fireworks. So not actually on the 4th, but still going to get it in.
Very cool. Yeah. What beach you end up going to?
Actually, we just have like a beach in my neighborhood.
Cool.
It's very small and it's not like super nice or anything. But I live on Plum Point.
Sure. Okay. And you said like Saunderstown?
Yeah.
Yeah. Very cool. Very cool. So just to give a brief intro on you, I did a little bit of research for this yesterday and the day before as we were getting this set up, listening to some of the podcasts you've been on, and you have your own podcast as well, the Weightlifting Scoop.
Yeah.
But I listened to the Weightlifting House one, and the nickname that I might forget, I might get this slightly off, but the nickname that Seb had given you was I think Mr. Consistent or like Mr. Reliable, something along those lines. Obviously just because of your resume of like how many times, I think it was even was it 4 years back to back, 7 total national championships, but was it 4 back to back?
I honestly don't know. I'd have to think about it. But
Sure.
But yeah, I mean, consistency is important to
Yeah.
me. I think, you want to get strong and you want to stay strong. And, being able to go to meets and consistently perform is as important as having this top potential, right? So,
Totally.
yeah.
As I was looking through on Wikipedia, they have a list of like all the different men's in the U.S. national champions.
Mm-hmm.
And, you're, as far as, 7, you're right up there with like, there's not many people that have that many. We'll put it that way.
No.
Chad Vaughn is the one that kind of like pops out. And there is obviously some people like back in the day in like the 80s, but names that maybe you know better than me. I nerd out on this stuff, but I'm not a historian by any means. So some names I didn't recognize. The only other name I recognized on that list was Chad Vaughn. So you're up there as far as the consistency at the national level.
Yeah, I think there's like 25 people in the grouping from 7 to 13. And, obviously at certain points in history, it was easier and harder to win national championships depending on the weight class you were in, right? So,
Sure.
yeah, obviously if you're in a weight class like 55 kilos and you can easily make that body weight, you might be
Sure.
the only one going to nationals.
Sure.
I think we literally had one guy at nationals this year. So
No way.
But if you're in that, middle body weight category,
Yeah.
like right now with the current weight class is like 73 to 96, it's pretty difficult to win
Yeah.
on a yearly basis because there's a lot of people that weigh that. So
Just the sheer volume of people that are competing.
yeah.
There's like that bell curve. Like you said, like 55 kilo weight class, you might have only a few people. Then you have a ton of people competing at those in between, like average weight classes, and maybe a little less as it tapers off. But highly competitive, competitive weight classes.
Or if you're like a super heavyweight and you have no way to compete in a different weight class, and you have people like Kaiser and Aaron Williams.
Sure.
It's really hard to win that weight class. But anyways.
So as I was getting ready for this podcast too, I'm like, as far as Rhode Island goes, so we'll continue on the quick bio, but I would argue, and you're a humble guy, so you don't have to accept this if you don't want to, but at least in Rhode Island, most decorated weightlifter in Rhode Island. There's one other guy who came to mind who actually lives in Middletown. You might know him, you might not, but this guy Mark Cameron.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, he's the youngest guy to clean and jerk 500 pounds, or clean a press at the time, maybe. I'm not 100%
He's
sure.
the lightest.
Lightest.
So he's the only non-super heavyweight to clean and jerk 500 pounds. So I mean, I definitely wouldn't say that my career is better than his. Like
No,
he's
no.
multiple Olympian and he did those things. But as far as active lifters, you know, in terms of um, i- accomplishments, I would say probably. But there's a lot of people coming up, and it's a
Yeah,
great community. So
totally.
I think like from where weightlifting was at when I first moved here to where it is today in Rhode Island and New England in general,
Yeah.
it's a lot different. So it's pretty cool to see.
Yeah, and I want to dig deep on that a little bit later in the podcast, like specifically what's going on in New England and Rhode Island. But a couple quick other things I'm gonna rifle off to give you your full bio here. So yeah, president of New England Weightlifting. I don't know if I said that already. You run the podcast, the Weightlifting Scoop. Coach and owner of the Tsunami weightlifting team.
Yeah,
Yep.
yeah. So that's my club and what I run meets through and everything like that. So basically the idea there is like the weightlifting scoop is the podcast, which is TWS, and then Tsunami Weightlifting System is like my system of weightlifting. So like basically how I do training, and I also a lot of the people that I coach that are at a national level, they compete for Rising Tide, which is the team that I compete for as well. So
Gotcha.
my coach and I do the competition coaching for Rising Tide as well. So
Very cool. Okay. Yeah, I saw that. I think on your most recent nationals, that was the team you in 2023, Rising Tide weightlifting. Gotcha. And then before that, East Coast Gold. Was
yeah,
it?
yeah, I
East
was
Coast
on
Gold.
East Coast
Cool.
Gold for a little while. So
And then also just giving a brief history. Well, a history. I'll put it that way. You've competed at the Olympic Training Center, and I question on that too, as because obviously they don't have weightlifting there at the moment. Hopefully, maybe down the road we get it back. But Cal Strength, which has been, I mean, a lot of people, I think especially in my age group of weightlifting, looked up to those guys, and you were there as far as like, hey, this is really cool. This is getting like the sport pushing forward. Muscle Driver USA, same thing. That's like something cool on the YouTube, like watching you guys lift. East Coast Gold, I mean, again, a highly decorated weightlifting team. I just had another guy.
Crisanto.
Yes, Crisanto on recently from East Coast Gold, who's been crushing it, youth athlete and doing very well.
Yeah, he just won nationals. So
Did
yeah,
he end up winning?
Yeah,
That's
so
awesome.
he's got ties to Rhode Island. I think
Yeah.
like he's gonna end out living in Massachusetts now. But
Yes, he's going to
yeah, so cool to see
BU or
another Rhode
BC.
Islander.
Yeah, he's awesome. And then so and originally you're living in North Carolina for a while, but originally from Georgia.
Yep.
Yeah,
Yep.
very cool. And it graduated from Georgia Tech
Yep. Yep.
in software engineering, or
Yeah. So I did my undergrad in business administration. I'm actually wearing a Georgia Tech hat now.
hey,
But yeah. So and then I just recently finished my master's degree in computer science.
very
So
cool.
I was dual majoring in my undergrad, and then I finished my business degree, and basically I was under a lot of pressure for like weightlifting, like the timing of things. So
Sure.
I finished that, and then I left like a couple semesters on my computer science degree, and then I never finished it until recently. So I actually ended up getting a master's now, but
Nice.
I felt like there was some unfinished business. so I did
Yes,
that.
had to finish the job. I love it. All right, so rapid fire questions. A lot of these are Rhode Island related, but you can add anything that you want. So, first one we got is favorite coffee shop in the area.
Oh man.
Putting you on the spot. Is it in Gansett or Saunderstown?
There was one that used to be in South County Commons. It's called Audrey's now.
Oh yeah,
But
yeah.
I forget what it used to be called.
Was
but
it TLC or was it
Oh, TLC is a good
yeah,
one. TLC
yeah,
is a good one by
yeah.
URI. All right.
I forget what it used to be called too. I get you, but yeah, Audrey's. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
So yeah, I'll go with TLC.
All right, that's a good choice. How about favorite go-to breakfast spot or restaurant?
I like Plum Point Bistro just because it's close to my house. But yeah.
Good choice. I don't know if you're a book guy or Audible guy, but favorite book that you've read, either recently or it could have been like for your masters, it's a textbook or something like that.
Sure. I like a lot of the Malcolm Gladwell books. This isn't
Nice.
one, but Paradox of Choice is kind of similar to that.
Cool.
And so that's a good book right there.
Awesome. I haven't heard of that one. I gotta check that out. And then this will be an interesting answer for you, I think. Favorite recent podcast you listened to?
Oh man, honestly, I haven't been listening to podcasts or creating them for a while now.
Sure.
I listen to a lot of chess podcasts actually.
Really?
So.
Okay.
Yeah.
Like
yeah.
strategy type stuff, or?
Yeah, it's just that they generally like interview. How to chess is like the short version, but they have like little quick 15-minute podcasts they're sponsored by Chessable, which is a chess website for studying.
Very cool.
And it's hosted by a guy named Ben Johnson, who's big into podcasting in that area. So,
Sure.
it's
That's
just something
cool.
fun. I'm actually not as much of a consumer of weightlifting content
Totally.
as other skills,
Sure.
because I'm more of a total beginner in a lot of other areas, and so I'm like trying to soak up all this information. And in weightlifting, I've been in the sport so long that I do consume content, but not as much as like other areas. So.
Sure. I like that. That's cool. That caught me off guard. That's a great answer. Next one we got, and the answer could be, I know Nationals just happened, but somewhere you traveled recently?
Yeah, Pittsburgh.
Pittsburgh,
That was the most recent thing.
Yeah.
So.
You had a couple athletes there?
Yeah, coached a couple people, so it was
Nice.
a good time.
Favorite weightlifting shoe?
Weightlifting shoe? I mean, I like the Nike Romaleos.
Nice. Yeah, good choice. And then what do you we'll do this one. What are you liking right now for in the gym for if like a favorite like guilty pleasure pump up gym song?
Pump up Jones. Oh man. Crazy What Love Can Do, the techno version.
Okay, nice. Next one we got favorite cheat meal.
Favorite cheat meal. Well, I've been doing a lot of that lately since
Yeah.
my last meet, but no, I don't know. I mean, I really like lasagna. My mom
All
has
right.
this great lasagna recipe that I honestly haven't made in a long time, but
Sure.
it's the best. So.
That's awesome. That's good. And this is we'll probably skip ahead with this one a little bit, but if just off the top of your head, like any favorite supplements that you take, and it could even just be like protein, but
Creatine.
Creatine,
Yeah, I
yeah.
don't take a ton of supplements, but creatine's the tried and true one that actually has the research behind it.
totally, I like that. All right, so getting into a little bit of the meat potatoes of the podcast. So I know you talked about this a lot on the Weightlifting House podcast, but we don't have to go into crazy detail if you don't want to. I mean, we can if you want, but your kind of backstory, how you got introduced and into Olympic weightlifting.
Yeah. Getting introduced to the sport really changed my life because I've, dedicated a lot of time to it. So I think it's important. But, when I was in high school, I actually went to high school with a lot of great athletes. I went to high school with Calvin Johnson.
That's so cool.
And, some other athletes. There was a guy named Christian Taylor who won the triple jump in the Olympics. He's a little younger than me. I didn't actually really know him personally, but there's a story about him coming to high school, and the first time he ran like the 400 meter, he did some crazy time, and I'm not going to throw it out there because
Right.
I can't remember what it was, but I had a lot of friends that ran, and they took that as seriously as I did weightlifting.
Sure.
So I thought they were really good, and then he just did this like crazy thing. He's like the Olivia Reeves of running,
Yeah.
and I didn't realize that he was going to become like the gold medalist in the triple jump, right? So, anyways, so I wrestled and played football, and I realized that I wasn't really going to play football at the next level, so I decided that I wanted to do something to get better at wrestling. And so it was kind of an emotional decision, but I decided to stop playing football, and then I wanted to, during that time, do something to get better for wrestling. And so with that being said, basically I ended out going to Velocity Sports Performance, which was like similar to CrossFit before CrossFit. The actual training regimen wasn't that similar, but
Interesting. Yeah, I haven't heard of them.
premier looking, like beautiful location. They had all Usaka plates and
Nice.
bars, and it was very clean cut. So the Velocity was set up really to try to help athletes get ready for combines.
Gotcha.
So my coach, CJ Stockel, my original coach, he was there coaching a weightlifting team, and he had this dream where like he could utilize Velocity Sports Performance to create a weightlifting team at every location. and that would be like the best way to scale the sport.
Smart.
So in the long run, it really didn't end out working out. It was kind of like a high overhead business model. While it was a beautiful location, in order to get all that equipment, it cost a lot of money.
Sure.
So they ended out not really working out as a company, and I ended out just really training in his garage. But going in there, finding him, and started talking to him. And my goal originally was to get better at wrestling, but as I started talking to him, I had already like squatted like 500 pounds. So he's like, "How much do you squat?" And I was weighing about 77 kilos at the time, and so I was like, "Oh, I squat like 500 pounds," and I don't know if he believed me or not. So we do some squats, and
It's about 170 pounds for 77 kilos. Yeah.
Yeah. So I was wrestling in like the 152 to 170 range at that point, and so yeah, he was like, "Okay, like let's do some squats," and I did some squats, and he realized like I was reasonably strong, and said, "Okay, like come back tomorrow. I want you to train weightlifting," and I just came every day.
Wow.
From there, at least like the 4 or 5 times a week that I was going there. So.
And what do you remember kind of what grade you were in high school at this point?
10th grade.
Yeah, it's like sophomore year. Yeah.
This was like 2004. I graduated in 2006. So.
Gotcha. So you're probably somewhere like around like age 16-ish.
Yeah, exactly. Like I was able to drive, so I was able to drive myself to train.
Sure.
And all that, and so yeah, I was just that age.
Is that something? Because that's obviously like just a lot of raw power to have at that age. Is that something that like you were doing we were doing football, you were doing wrestling, like they probably had you doing some level of like team lifting, like you just kind of put the bar on your back and you're like, hey, this is I kind of got this. This is easy.
Well, I mean, sort of. I think if I really look back at my history, like when I was in middle school, like I was a fat kid, and so I essentially got sent to what I would call fat camp. It was called conditioning camp.
Okay.
And so we went there, and it was for football, but we did a lot of lifting weights and running. So we would lift for like an hour and a half, and then we would run. And so I did a lot of squats there, leg press.
Sure. Okay.
Even upper body stuff. But we did a lot of things there.
Yeah.
And then we'd run. I remember, like, you wake up the next day, you can't even walk, but then you go back and you train, right? And so you just are kind of put into the meat grinder. But it was a lot of fun. Like, I enjoyed that hard work. And
gotcha. So there was some hard work put behind that squat for sure.
Yeah, and then at my high school, like, I guess I didn't realize this, but where I was at, we had a weight training program, so it was a class in school. And
really?
Yeah, and to be a part of the football team, you had to do 30 workouts over the summer.
Sure.
And there are exceptions to that. There were kids that, like, their parents were divorced, they're spending the summer across the country, or so there's reasons. But basically, summer was really boring for me, to be quite honest with you, so I enjoyed going and doing those workouts. That was my outlet.
It's hot in Atlanta in the summertime.
And even when I stopped playing football, I still I made sure that they allowed me to keep like training with the football team as far as like strength training goes. So yeah, I mean, I think prior to that, probably for 4 or 5 years, I had already lifted weights. I just wasn't a weight lifter.
Totally. Okay. No, that makes a lot of sense. All right. So you were introduced to weightlifting through high school, and then I guess what was the next step from there that took you like kind of on that same path?
Through weightlifting?
Yeah. So after high school, you when did I guess you start? What was the next bridge? Because was the next big milestone, I guess, essentially Olympic Training Center for you, or?
Yeah. So before we move on from that, I think one thing that is really important when you have a group of kids is exposure.
Sure.
So like when I was in that weight room, there was a guy named Kedrick Goldstein who played a D-line at UGA and the Washington Redskins.
Okay. Yeah.
A couple years older than me, so he's like this freak athlete.
Yeah.
And would just lift huge weights. And we had like 3 or 4 other people. Like there were some guys that didn't actually make it to the NFL that were actually stronger than some of those guys.
Yeah.
And so, I didn't really realize that these people were like on a national level really good in their sport or domain. It was just normal.
Yeah.
Like we had a guy who ran a 4.18 on track pad. 40-yard dash. It was like one of the fastest times in the nation that year. And so he did it. His name's Will Judson. It's not like, a lot of people say stuff like this, and
Yeah.
it's bullshit, but this was laser timed.
Yeah, yeah.
And that was the fastest time. So there was like 7 times between 4:18 and 4:20. But either way, exposure is so important. So I saw people squatting 500 pounds in high school consistently.
Yeah.
So it wasn't like a weird thing. I was like, oh, they do it?
Yeah.
I'm going to do it too for sure. Like,
Yeah.
that was always the mindset. And so I think that's one of the biggest things that you can do when it comes to development.
Sure.
Is expose people to others that are doing the things that they want to do. And initially it might seem tough to get there, but you just have this expectation that when you stick with it, you are going to be there.
100%.
But getting back to your
Yeah.
next question, like, what's the bridge there? So I trained with CJ. So, okay, middle school, high school, I was exposed to lifting weights. Didn't know that weightlifting was a sport at all. Going to Velocity Sports Performance, I really played other sports so I could lift weights. I just was like, oh, this is like this accessory thing that you do for your sport. And it is for some people. But I enjoyed that part of it more. And so once I found out weightlifting was its own sport, I said, well, why would I not just pursue that? Because I'm just playing other sports so that I can lift weights. And then if I can just lift weights as a sport, that sounds pretty cool.
Sure.
So I kind of just jumped all in with CJ and trained for a while. And then once I graduated high school, I was at Georgia Tech for a year. And I was given the opportunity to go to the Olympic Training Center for a camp. And at that point in time, like, I was a highly ranked junior athlete, but I wasn't like the top junior athlete, right? And so
Right.
there was definitely a handful of people who were much better than me. So when I went to that camp, the coach saw that I worked hard and I was responding to training. And so he was like, I feel like this guy has potential. He kind of fought for me to get a residency spot. So I actually lived there for a year and a half.
Wow.
So high school, graduated, went to Georgia Tech for a year, and then lived at the Olympic Training Center for, let's just say, 2 years.
Sure.
And then after that, went back to Georgia Tech to finish my degree.
Cool.
So I had essentially finished all the credits that would transfer. Was getting a little banged up and just burnt out.
Sure.
Of the program there, because you're basically training 9 sessions a week.
Oh.
Like, your life revolves around weightlifting, which is awesome, but it's like this family feel where everyone, and this small town feel where, like, you love everybody, but
Yeah.
you know everything about them. And
Yeah.
what they've had for breakfast, how many shits they take a day, whatever, who they're sleeping with, and
Right.
so some parts about that you like it, and then sometimes you're like, man, I kind of like am not enjoying only hanging out with like the same 10 people every day. So
Sure.
decided to leave and finish school at Georgia Tech, and
Yeah.
eventually kind of got back to where I was training full time again.
And side question on that, I know the Olympic Training Center, they stopped hosting weightlifting, it was a couple years ago now, right? Something like that. Is that something that you feel, and I guess it could be no right or wrong answer to this, but like, would that something you feel like would be beneficial to bring back to the OTC, or is it almost better the way it is now, like kind of separated, independent through different gyms? Just from your experience.
It depends on your point of view. I
Yeah.
think from performance, it's not necessarily the best to have a centralized program where you live full time there. I think it's really cool to have camps like a few times a year, where
Okay.
you bring the top athletes together to train together for a week or two at a time. I think a couple different things is, like, not everyone can find a job or
Sure.
in the same location. Not
Sure.
everybody responds to the exact same type of training.
Sure.
And so kind of like the idea there was to bring everybody together, have this coach who was, in their mind, like this great coach, and everybody be on the same program and train together, eat together, and do all those things. And so what you ended up finding is it didn't really work for everyone, even though everyone had talent coming in.
Right.
And so some people excelled and some people got hurt, or it just
Right.
didn't respond to the training, or, couldn't get their life together
Sure.
in that location.
Sure.
So
That makes a lot of sense.
I think the camp is a good hybrid, and they still do that. They have camps at Rogue and stuff like that.
Sure.
But and at the OTC as well.
Yeah.
Um,
I remember when Crisanto was on the podcast, he was super excited, like, oh, I got to go train. And I mean, he's a remote guy at East Coast Gold, so he's like, oh, I get to go train. Like, I think like Wes Kitts was down there, or there was a high level guy down there. He's like, oh, it was so cool to like be around those guys, for a few weeks.
Sure.
You know?
Yeah. I mean, and again, it's like exposure, right?
Yeah.
You just kind of see those things, and you see that you're competing with them. You may not be doing the exact same things yet, but you can see that it's possible.
Sure.
And so yeah, I mean, I think that exposure and camp environment, even if it's not an official camp at the OTC or something.
Sure. Yeah. Makes sense.
So I think the program overall, like I don't really think. I mean, performance continues to increase overall, especially on the women's side, without having a resident program. I think really the best thing is to have as many coaches as possible, and it's just a numbers game.
Yeah.
Ultimately, I like to deny a little bit that genetics plays such a big factor, but it definitely does. And I mean, you look at like Olivia Reeves, and like she snatched 120 kilos at 71 kilos body weight, which is absolutely insane.
Yeah.
And so you're not going to take any girl off the street and have them reach that level.
Right.
There's a handful of girls in the nation who could potentially do that.
Yeah.
But it's not everyone can. So
Totally.
You got to get more athletes involved and find those. And then once you find those, then the training method is the most important thing,
Totally. And I don't going off on a kind of a separate tangent, something I want to ask you a little later, but we can get to it now, is just the current state of weightlifting in general in the U.S. I mean, obviously there's been issues, U.S. versus international from like an obvious drug abuse standpoint in a lot of these international countries like Russia, China, which, me personally, my 2 cents, I feel like the USADA has done a better job of leveling the playing field a little bit, but I guess what's kind of your stance as far as like how have we done in the United States as far as weightlifting is, and what can we do to keep getting better? It's a big question, but a lot of answers there.
Sure. I mean, from a historical perspective, there wasn't always out of competition drug testing. There wasn't even in competition drug testing if you go far enough back. And so, at certain points in time, like the U.S. was very good, and then I think it was like the early 90s, the USADA started, and I'm sure somebody will fact check me in, but there's a certain point in time when USADA started and they started doing out of competition drug testing. And so, like for me personally and everyone that is making international teams, you have to submit your whereabouts and let USADA know where you're at on a daily basis. And you do have like some leeway there where if you miss a couple tests, it's okay. But if you miss a test, they're going to start coming more frequently for you. And so you can't just disappear, right? And so you are essentially in this testing pool where you have to be clean 100% of the time, or you're risking, getting popped and not being able to compete anymore. And just general, like, being ostracized, right?
Sure. Yeah.
So you're going to be frowned upon, like all these things. So there's a lot of reasons why most of the U.S. is very clean. Like, I think most of the top U.S. lifters are 100% lifetime clean. Not 100% of those lifters, but most of them.
Yeah.
And most of the time when you see a positive drug test, it's actually from someone in the C session at nationals that just doesn't know. They might be taking a tainted supplement, or they're doing it on purpose.
Right.
But it's actually not someone who's on the world team.
Right.
So we do.
They know better.
We do have a lot of positive drug tests, but it's not from the people that actually have the top performances.
Right.
So, anyways, in terms of international lifting, a lot of countries, like, there's so many stories, but ultimately, most countries don't have an internal testing agency.
Right.
They might get tested by the international testing agency or the independent testing agency, the ITA, but they're not tested by internal people trying to catch them.
Right.
And if they do have an internal agency, a lot of times they're trying to help them, Like,
Sure.
hey, we're going to test you before the competition and keep you from going to the international competition if you're dirty.
Right.
Not ban you.
Right. Right.
You saw that if I test positive, I would get banned.
Right.
And I can't compete. So they're trying to catch cheaters. Whereas other countries, they might have an agency that's actually trying to help them pass drug tests.
Right. Right.
So, it's definitely not an even playing field.
Yeah.
I think there's more random drug testing overall. The system for qualification for the Olympics forces athletes to come to competitions and be subject to drug testing more frequently.
Mm-hmm.
So it's definitely not an even playing field, but it's much more even than it was for 20, 30 years.
Sure. Sure. It's gotten better.
Yeah.
And like the part two of that question too is I feel like in general, and it could have been like from the Cal Strength days and like just CrossFit, the popularity. I know the weightlifting has continued to improve over the past few years. So, like you were mentioning earlier, like those pool of athletes seems to be growing a bit each year.
Yeah, I think there was definitely. This could be my perspective
Yeah.
too.
Yeah.
But I think that there was a peak in fandom of weightlifting around like 2015, 2016.
Sure.
And then I think like a few years after that, there was a peak of people actually being athletes in weightlifting. So I think a lot of those fans became athletes.
Yeah.
And then, right now we're in a period where we're reaping the benefits of some of those kids that got into weightlifting through those days, whether directly or indirectly.
Sure.
They may not even know, but maybe someone that was exposed to Cal Strength videos or muscle driver videos eventually got that person into weightlifting, and then that kid's really good now.
Sure. Yeah.
So it may not necessarily be like that kid used to watch Cal Strength videos
Right,
or something
right.
like that. So I think now we're reaping the benefits of some of those outliers being found.
Mm-hmm.
But I do worry a little bit because there are certain things going on. Like, for instance, certain junior and youth teams are not being funded right now by the organization. I think that there is less fandom overall. You go to nationals, there's not a huge crowd. Traditionally there's not, but for a few years there really was.
Sure. Sure.
And I think, like, CrossFit in general is not as big as it was.
Totally.
And so it'll be interesting to see what happens in 10 years. But right now, we got an Olympic team that's very, very awesome.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
we have potential to win at least one medal on the men's and women's side. And
Totally.
I think all three of the women have a chance to medal. But if we were to have a male medal and a female medal, that would be a huge accomplishment because that hasn't happened in the U.S. in so long.
Right.
It actually never, because
Really?
women's weightlifting was introduced as an Olympic sport in 2000, right? So
Right.
we haven't had a male medal in the Olympics since before that.
Right. Was it I'm blanking on his name. I was just checking it earlier. Oscar was the last medalist. Was it,
I don't think
forget.
Oscar he won Junior Worlds, but he was never a medalist in the Olympics.
Gotcha. Okay.
I think honestly our last medalist in the Olympics was 1984.
What was his name?
Mario Martinez.
Okay.
But and to be quite honest with you, the only reason he medaled is because the Soviets decided not to come to the Olympics because it was a boycotted Olympics in LA.
Interesting. Okay.
So not everybody showed up.
Gotcha. Okay. So there might be a little asterisk on that year even.
Sure. So yeah, and not to take anything away from his accomplishment, but just saying that it's been a long time since people have legitimately been at the level to medal at the Olympics, and a lot of that does have to do with an uneven playing field with drug testing, but some of it has to do with a lot of other factors as well. Just
Right.
a lack of popularity. The press was removed in 1972, which the U.S. was very dominant at. So then it became snatch and clean and jerk, whereas it used to be, clean and jerk, snatch, clean and press.
Right.
And so when you take out one of the major lifts, and the U.S. kind of started to struggle for a while after that. So then you remove the best lift, and then there's bad training methodology because so much of the training was dedicated towards the press, and a slow to adopt new training methods as well as techniques.
Sure.
Because if you're a world champion or you've coached a world champion, you're not going to be quick to develop. Plus, there's no YouTube.
Right.
You're only exposed to international lifters like once a year.
Sure.
And only if you see it with your own eyes. You can't take a video with your smartphone.
Right.
You're not going to take a big old like
Yeah, right, right.
VHS recorder. So, yeah, there's
Makes
a lot
sense.
that goes on there. So I think the listeners are probably getting confused at this point.
No. I do have one further question because I was talking to my friend who's big into CrossFit, does some weightlifting, and I'm like, yeah, like the U.S., like, you know, I think like in the past few years we've only had maybe like not this year, but the years prior, like maybe one slot, maybe two slots that we've for men to even go to the Olympics. He's like, how does that make sense? I thought everybody should get like equal slots. Can you explain that a little bit? Like, because there's certain like qualifying totals that you have to meet. Like, why do some countries like get more lifters like than us type of thing?
Sure. So it works differently now than it did in the past.
Okay.
So let me just explain the past briefly first.
Sure.
So pre-2000, there was only men's weightlifting in the Olympics.
Mm-hmm.
And so say we have 200 slots for the Olympics for weightlifting.
Sure.
All right. So when there was only men's weightlifting, that was enough slots where a country like the U.S. Might be able to send a full team of 10 men's weightlifters. So there might have been 10 men's weight classes back then. Or you might have 8 and then 2 alternates that actually travel with the team, right? Mm-hmm. So, and I don't know, like 200 was a hypothetical number. There could be more. But so after 2000, they introduced women's weightlifting as an Olympic sport, which is awesome.
Yes.
But instead of the IOC saying, we're going to give you 400 slots instead of 200 or whatever that number is.
Right.
They said, well, we're going to split it between men and women. Okay? And what they did is they had 8 men's weight classes and 7 women's weight classes. So the previous weight class set. And so all the countries, they now have a men's and women's weightlifting team. And these slots are split a certain way between men and women. And so men's spots get cut. And so over time, women's weightlifting has become more popular. And it is important that there's the same amount of slots allocated. So they have now made the same amount of weight classes for men and women.
Sure.
And the teams are of equal size. But due to various reasons, and they really use certain things as an excuse, but the IOC doesn't view weightlifting as being marketable.
Okay.
And so instead of increasing the slots, they've continued to kind of chop that. So now you have like 150 slots or so on the Olympics between like all the weight classes that are contested. So you got 5 men's and 5 women's weight classes contested, and between men and women. So you got to have like 75 and 75 or whatever that number is.
Yeah.
So that's why it's really tough to make the Olympics, because the amount of slots is really small. So, if you were in like the 70s, you could essentially make the Olympic team much easier because there was 10 men that got to go to the Olympics, right?
Right.
And it wasn't easy.
No.
But it was
from a numbers perspective.
Yeah, it's easier because there's still a small pool of people that compete. So all those people were really good, but for a couple quads, like you're saying, you have to be the top male lifter in the U.S., which those 2 times it was Kendrick Ferris. So.
Kendrick Ferris, yeah. And one Chad Vaughn was.
Chad Vaughn competed, a couple times.
Yeah.
And 8 and 12, but he but he wasn't the only male lifter. So,
Okay,
so
gotcha.
the 2 times that we had one
Just
slot,
one was Kendrick Ferris. Yeah.
It was Kendrick. Yeah.
Gotcha. Okay. And we've improved over the past couple. We're starting to get more, which is good.
Yeah, they changed the qualification from a team qualification to an individual qualification system. So yeah. But that's why there used to be more slots to less slots, and then they transitioned from a team qualification to an individual at a certain point at the IWF level. Reason being, because there were some countries like, say, North Korea, for instance, which it's very difficult to get a WADA representative into North Korea because you have to notify the government, get the visa, and then you have to go. So if the government is on your side,
Sure.
like there's stories about the Bulgarian weightlifting team back in the day. If the government's on your side, internally you're not being drug tested. And when WADA comes into your country, if they even let the WADA rep into the country, you've been notified already they're going to be there.
Sure.
So you either disappear in the mountains somewhere where they can't find you, or you're actually clean for the drug test, right?
Right.
And so, but in advance when it's happening.
Sure.
It's
sure.
not the same as you saw it knocking on your door any day of the week.
Yeah.
And so,
The P-Police.
yeah. And so what was happening is they would send a team that would qualify slots, and then they would send these lifters who've been doping up for like 3-4 years or their whole lives or whatever to be clean for the Olympics only.
Right.
And they would send them, and you had never heard of this lifter, and then all of a sudden they're Olympic champion, right?
That's probably a big red flag. Like, hey, who's this guy from Bulgaria we've never heard of?
Exactly.
Yeah.
And North Korea was the team that did this most frequently.
Okay. Yeah.
So they moved to an individual qualification, and one of the problems they were trying to solve among many was
Sure.
that this particular lifter has to show up 6 times in a 2-year period to be subject to drug testing, and they have to go to 2 of the qualifiers in order to be eligible.
Right.
And so you can't have this random person
Can't have
who's
a
never
rando.
competed in weightlifting before show up to the Olympics and win. They
Right.
would have had to go through the process.
And that seems to have been successful as far as like at least a little bit.
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
I think it's definitely improved, like
Yeah.
evening the playing field. Obviously, it's still not the same as having random drug testing
Yeah.
potentially happening any day of the week.
Right.
But
Because that would be the best way to do it.
it changes the things that they can do
Right.
to
Right.
where they're less effective. So the difference is less than it would be otherwise
100%.
in the past.
Makes sense. I mean, and I'm guessing like let's say if you were able to let's say you were president of the IOC, let's say, or world weightlifting, was there anything I mean, I'm guessing funding would be the biggest issue, but the way to level the playing field would be random drug tests the top lifters from every country, send WADA to every country and randomly drug test the athletes. But I'm sure funding would be the issue, or one of the issues with that.
Sure, I mean,
Yeah.
that's extremely expensive.
Yeah, right.
If I have to send you to travel to Bulgaria or North Korea, I mean, first of all, you might fear for your life legitimately if
Right.
if they don't want you to drug test. And I don't think that's as much of a thing anymore. But
Sure.
but seriously, I mean, there's stories in the 90s when Bulgarian weightlifting was at its peak, or say early 2000s, where they might go to their training facility in the mountains. Somehow the WADA rep gets them and gets urine samples from them, and then the WADA rep is driving down the mountain and bandits wreck them and steal the samples and stuff.
Yeah.
And obviously these stories are probably embellished, and they're third hand by the time they get to me, so it's like a game of telephone.
Right.
But there's some truth to it, right?
Right.
So
I mean, you can see that in some of these countries. If it's Russia, China, you have someone come in hey, that guy, he's on something. This WADA rep has the results. Let's make sure he doesn't get home. I don't know. Just putting hypotheticals out there.
Sure, if the government is behind you,
Right.
then, and some of it seems like conspiracy theories.
Sure,
but
sure.
It actually,
there's some legitimacy behind it.
yeah, and it wasn't that far removed from the story being told, right?
Yeah.
But
Right.
that being said, I mean, what would limit drug usage?
Yeah.
Lifetime bans is a big thing.
Sure.
That's really tough, though, because it is possible to legitimately fail a drug test by accident.
Sure.
I mean, because there are certain things like ADHD medication,
Sure.
cold medication like Sudafed, and these things may or may not be banned all the time, but over time there have been certain things. I mean, it's not uncommon for supplements to be tainted, so you might have these very small amounts, trace amounts, show up on a drug test, and you're going to fail the drug test, but it's you're not actually taking that substance on purpose.
Sure. Yeah.
So it's possible to fail a drug test by accident.
Sure.
90+% of the time, when people get popped, it's not by accident. especially
Right.
especially if it's like, you know, testosterone or something obvious. You can't just accidentally take certain things, right?
Right.
So I think lifetime bans, I think sort of what they're doing is one thing. I mean, it's unrealistic to have every athlete tested out of competition multiple times a year,
Yeah.
just from a practical standpoint, because
Sure.
everybody lives in different countries and
Yeah.
it's just expensive.
Yeah. So yeah, no, but so kind of do what you can and wish for the best type of thing in many ways.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I think as long as you're forcing people to show up and compete somewhat frequently,
Yeah.
at least you're
Yeah.
evening the playing field. I think lifetime bans would be a good thing, though.
Yeah. Cool. All right. And then kind of similar question, but diluting it down to more of a Rhode Island. 'Cause we talked about U.S., talked about worldwide, but like Rhode Island, like New England weightlifting. So you're the president. And how when did you start that or for New England
A
weightlifting?
couple years ago,
Yeah.
so they kind of switched over to this new format called weightlifting state organizations.
Mm.
So let's see, 2022.
Okay.
So in January of 2022, you had people apply to be on the WSO board, and then I ended up applying to be president. USA Weightlifting chose me to be in that position.
Very cool.
So initially, how it works is you run to be on the WSO board, and then once you make that, if you want to be the president, then you have to apply.
Sure.
And then USA Weightlifting at that point interviews people and chooses. I think in my case, I was the only one who actually applied to be the president. But,
hey, that's good though.
but that's how the process would work is
Yeah.
if multiple people applied,
Sure.
then USA Weightlifting would interview them and decide who should be in that position based on various, reasons.
Sure, yeah. And something that a question I have for you too is like, I personally I've worked out or lifted at Providence Barbell Club, Rhode Island Performance. I haven't been down to Wesley Barbell yet, but anything you're seeing right now that and anything that they're Rhode Island and New England in general is doing really well and for weightlifting in general, whether it's getting athletes, like putting people to nationals, growing the sport.
Yeah, I mean, I first moved here in 2017, and then, I was kind of in and out of Rhode Island for a little while.
Sure.
My wife's family lives here, so she wanted to be here at a certain point once Muscle Driver shut down. We didn't have ties to Charlotte.
Sure.
So we moved here, and then I kind of, my job is actually in Wilmington, North Carolina. I eventually got that position, and so I was still living in North Carolina some, and then when COVID happened, I've been here full time.
Sure.
But throughout that time from 2017 to now, I would say, the sport's grown a lot in Rhode Island. We do have that history. We mentioned Mark Cameron earlier.
Yes.
And Central Falls weightlifting. There was a coach named Joe Mills who is considered like historically as one of the best weightlifting coaches in the U.S., if not the best, and he was here in Rhode Island.
Yeah.
And a lot of people don't know that because it was a long time ago.
Sure.
So, we have, let's say, the best historical coach in weightlifting based out of Rhode Island. You have Mark Cameron, who's the lightest American to clean and jerk 500 pounds. And then when you look at New England, you have a lot of history here.
Sure.
So if you go to newenglandweightlifting.com, you can see the Hall of Fame and see a lot of really cool historical figures in the sport are from New England.
Sure.
And some of those being from Rhode Island, of course.
Cool.
And so there was a big gap, though, in time where nothing was going on here. And then when CrossFit started to happen, there was a few things going on here. There was the Poliquin Center.
Yeah.
It was in East Greenwich.
Yep.
And they were running a small weightlifting team at one point.
Oh, okay.
Ended out, like, for whatever reason, they decided that they didn't want to deal with weightlifting anymore. So the guy who was running the weightlifting program still continued to coach, but not out of that facility. And then, of course, you have Jared Kuhn in Westerly.
Mm-hmm.
He was getting into it. He owns Westerly Barbell and at the time Westerly CrossFit.
Mm-hmm.
So there was a bit of a team going on there. You had Providence Barbell with Dave and Jared up there, who now own their individual locations. So I think overall the sport's grown tremendously in Rhode Island from its lowest point, you know.
Sure. Yeah.
And I think we probably have more members than ever.
Sure.
Um,
Sure.
and you're starting to see some of those performances take off. So, I mean, I wouldn't necessarily group uh, Santo as being from Rhode Island. I mean, even
Right.
though he has ties, but he just won nationals,
Right.
and he has
Right.
some ties to Rhode Island.
Yep.
He wasn't developed as a lifter here or
Sure,
anything
sure.
like that. But and then you have Ava Georgi, who made
Yeah.
the youth world team. You have another girl from Connecticut, Marina Morales, who made the youth world team. So, you know, things that weren't really happening when I first moved here. Like there was not any other lifters that were like making the world team or winning nationals or even youth nationals and stuff like that. But now you have a lot of that stuff starting to happen.
Mm-hmm.
And so you can tell the pipeline is getting bigger. It's just a numbers game,
Totally.
more talent being interested.
Totally. And kind of to go along that same line, like anything that like in New England, like you see like, hey, we should double down on this, or we should start doing this to just making the sport bigger, better in New England or Rhode Island specifically.
Yeah. I think because the states are so small up here and they're not as populated in terms of weightlifting, that's why we are grouped as New England within USA Weightlifting.
Yeah.
So I think on like a micro level, like I don't really look at Rhode Island individually as much.
Sure, yeah.
As New England overall.
Yeah.
I mean, maybe in the long term, if we were to have enough members, they would probably split them off into their own organizations. But
Totally.
I think just continue to get kids into it, host good meets, and do the things that we're trying to do, like more social events, like basically keep good records, recognize talent. I think one of the things that we tried to do last year was do yearly awards, which is something that we hadn't done before. So we have this Hall of Fame, and we recognize the people who have put in a lifetime of work, whether they're an athlete, coach, significant contributor, or administrator. And I think it's important to recognize those people. And we had a Hall of Fame dinner last year. They've had them in the past, way before me. So
Sure.
but we did a nice banquet event. We gave out awards. I think one of the biggest things is just if you give people their props, they're motivated to keep doing it.
Sure.
If you never recognize people who are putting in all this time, then
more likely to fall off.
Yeah, they don't really care about it, right?
Sure.
They're like, oh, I'm doing all this and nobody even cares.
Yeah.
So I think at the end of the day, it's just recognizing people who are putting in the time and just saying thank you and giving them a public, thank you.
Right.
And an award, if nothing else.
And then this could be more of a broader question for USA, but I mean for New England as well. Like obviously funding is an issue. Like you mentioned, like for some of the youth world teams. Anything you see that is like can help with that, either from like a New England standpoint or like a U.S. standpoint. Yeah.
Sure. I think it'd be a tall ask to get funding to the club specifically. I think we need the clubs to run independently, and be able to fund themselves. Yeah. But I think on an individual level, like athlete level, we can do things to incentivize the athletes. We're not there yet, but I think we do have money within our WSO where we could eventually potentially do things like if you win the WSO championships in your age category, maybe we can help you with your flight to nationals or something like that. I don't like to give stipends. I haven't really seen that work over time. I think if you give things that go back to the sport, like if you are buying weightlifting shoes or paying for the flight or doing things like that keep them training. Right. It's like if a kid's like, if they're getting their flight paid for, they feel a sense of need to train for the meet. Sure. And so those are the types of things I would be looking at, and putting on events that are free. Like so far, these haven't been funded by the WSO. It's really Prototype Barbell hosted a youth camp, and they bought pizza and stuff, and it was free for all the kids to come up and just train for the day, get to know each other. So I think just really like building the community even beyond the walls of your gym. Sure. Kind of keeps you in it. If you do a lot of USA Weightlifting has done a lot of surveys over the years, and they find that people stay in the sport. Really, the word that comes up the most is community, or at least the type of words that lead back to that one. So people stay in it because they like the people. Yeah. It's like your satisfaction at work is determined by do you like your coworkers?
Sure.
And that's been shown through studies over time. So that's really what it comes down to. And so we're trying to build the community and hopefully help everybody like each other more. There's always going to be conflict in small pockets.
Yeah.
And so we can't like mend individual relationships. But I think if we can build a community at least where all those people who side by side might have conflict can be on opposite sides of the room and be cordial.
Sure.
I think that's the goal, is like the community at large. So having enough people like each other to build and have good events and have everybody come to the same events, I think that's huge.
That's cool. And that's, kind of go off on a small tangent. That's a big reason why, a part of the reason why I do this podcast in general. In Rhode Island is like bring everybody together. We have that benefit of being in a small state, so everybody knows each other, which is awesome for community, but can sometimes also cause butting heads because everybody knows each other. Kind of like the OTC you were talking about. But I that's been a goal of mine, is like, hey, let's connect all these gyms, let's connect all these people, reconnect some people, just elevate the sport and it's fitness based, elevate fitness in Rhode Island. So that's cool. That's cool to hear. That's an important piece of it.
I think, at a national level, you want that to happen. I think every WSO should have that goal to build the community within. And I think it's important that, the people in leadership, whether it's at USA Weightlifting or at the WSO level, that they're, neutral personalities that most people like. Everybody's not going to like you, but at least if they don't dislike or hate that person, I think a lot of times, people will get into these positions and then half the community hates them and half of them loves them, and then that's not good because that's very divisive. So if everybody kind of feels neutral about the leaders, it helps because they can kind of rally the troops and be a mediator, and build a community. And so just build part of the community, and then the other part is basically not going to be involved at all because this person's in charge, so.
What do you think about just as far as growing the sport in general? Because you had mentioned that you hit that kind of peak in popularity, and it's kind of leveled out a little bit. Same with CrossFit. What do you think about because obviously CrossFit and Olympic weightlifting have had they've helped build each other up. Continuing, what do you think about continuing to promote relationships between CrossFit and Olympic weightlifting in general?
Yeah, I used to be really involved with CrossFit, and so I don't really know where CrossFit stands anymore in terms of how popular it is. But of course, I think it's so important to bring different areas of fitness together. I've been competing in USAPL meets and just powerlifting in general for a little while now, and one of the goals there is obviously for my own ambitions. It's fun, but a lot of it too is to network with those people and see where are they hosting competitions? What size are these venues? Are they getting good contracts? Things that we could use in weightlifting. I went to the Northeast Regionals and it was a cool spot. And I'm like, hey, this would be a great venue for weightlifting. So I'm going to talk to the guy that hosted the competition and see, what were the details behind this? Is it reasonable for us as an organization to do this as well? And then the other part is there's a lot of overlap, right? We could host a weightlifting and powerlifting meet. Yeah. You can do weightlifting on Saturday, powerlifting on Sunday.
Right.
Kind of work with these people, split the cost a little bit.
Like a mini Arnold in a way?
Yeah, split. And then people could do the super total or just one.
Sure.
And then you're kind of exposing some of the powerlifters to weightlifters to powerlifting, have a little crossover marketing there. And so it's not like you're a direct target, but at the same time, someone who does powerlifting is more likely to enjoy weightlifting than someone who's a distance runner.
It's closer,
Yeah, so it's not one to one, but it's much closer than something that's further away, and then vice versa. As weightlifters, we squat and do pulls and might do at least some sort of pressing occasionally. So you're going to be likely to be decent at powerlifting at a base level.
I like that.
So yeah, one of my goals there is to just see what venues they're using, build those relationships, maybe do multiple sport events in the future.
That's cool. Then one other thing I've heard and people talk about. Crisanto actually and Travis Mash on podcast is one way that people have talked about growing the sport is through like high schools and colleges and stuff like that, getting ingrained in the curriculum. And Crisanto, when I had him on the podcast, he was saying how like his high school, I think it was Moorhead in I want to say Minnesota or Michigan, something like that.
Yeah, he's from yeah. They lived in Minnesota. I think like around St. Paul, maybe not in St. Paul.
And he was saying that his high school weightlifting competition like had an audience like is almost as big as or as big as like some of the American Opens.
Mm-hmm.
Like so like how like it exploded like and it seemed like in those like small pockets. But anything like that you've thought about as far as like for like New England?
Yeah, that's kind of like a tall task. So I think in general like those are good ideas,
Sure.
but realistically it's difficult to implement.
Sure.
Because there's a lot of oversight there. Like, I don't know if like effectively in the next 2 to 3 years I can make tangible progress in that area.
Fair.
And so while a long-term worthwhile thing to look at,
yeah,
I think in the short term really is just like hosting good events.
Yeah.
If you host good events, then people want to compete at them.
Totally.
And that's really the biggest thing. And that's not always finding the best lifters first. Like,
Sure.
so the first area that we tried to improve on when I became president, and these weren't like my ideas, but just our board. I happened to be in that position, but we're all on the board. It's like we wanted to grow the Instagram. We had an Instagram account. It had about 150, 200 followers. And we've grown that to where it's about 1,400. But it's not a huge number, but it's very targeted.
Sure.
Like we have 900 USA Weightlifting active athlete memberships in New England and 1,400 followers. So I think majority of those actual active members follow that page. So we're able to get information through like email lists, the Instagram and stuff like that. And then the other thing that we wanted to do was host good local competitions. So the WSO championships, we wanted it to be above a local level.
Yeah.
And look, so we were able to work with Donnie Venturosa, and he got us in the museum. So the American Heritage Museum, we're in this airplane hangar. It's very unique. So cool. So it's maybe not the most, it's different than a hotel meet, right? It's very unique. So it's not a place where you would host the nationals or something like that, but it's really, really cool. And it's got a lot of history, and you're lifting around these airplanes. And so people have really enjoyed that. And we've had an increase in participation at those meets. So I think that's where you start, is just making the competitions better on average so that people want to compete. So we have music, locations, those types of things. And a lot of times the increase in participation might come from like masters athletes first.
Sure.
And so that's not necessarily going to be 10 years from now who your best senior lifters are, but those people have kids and grandkids eventually. And so I think different people have different approaches. But my approach is just like get more people to be passionate about the sport, no matter who they are.
Sure.
And then they will eventually get their friends' kids, their kids and grandkids into the sport. And then eventually you run into those handful of lifters that are outliers, like your CJ Cummings, Olivia Reeves, and Kendrick Ferris, those types of lifters, Hampton Morris, Totally.
Very cool. I think that's a great answer. Just to be respectful of your time, we'll start to wrap up a little bit here.
Okay.
Last questions I leave people with are first thing, any events or anything coming up like in the near future that you're super excited about, number one. Number two, anything else you want to plug? I'm sure New England Weightlifting, your barbell club, Tsunami. And then last question is it sometimes a tough one to put you on the spot, but if you a favorite quote, mantra, or saying, something you can think of. So the way I describe it is, so you're in Saunders Sound. So you're right on Route 1 and Route 138. So you get let's say we build a billboard right there. You get a billboard. You put whatever you want. This is from Tim Ferriss' podcast. You put whatever you want on that billboard for one day, like something for your community. Maybe something like that. But to start, let's anything coming up, like any events, anything like that you're excited about?
Yeah, so hit me up with these one at a time. But yes, I do have answers for all of them.
Yes.
So the basic games and the WSO championships are the two meets that New England Weightlifting hosts every year. So the basic games coming up July 20th and 21st, so pretty soon, a couple weeks from now.
Gotcha.
And so there's about 110 lifters that will compete. It's at I believe it's called CrossFit Variant Plus. It used to be called CrossFit 5 Plus.
Yes.
But I believe CrossFit Variants and CrossFit 5 Plus merged.
Okay.
So I think it's called CrossFit Variants Plus in Beverly, Massachusetts. So come out, see some good lifting. We could always use volunteers to help load and help out with the meet and get to know the community a little bit. Also, the WSO championships at the American Heritage Museum, the 28th and 29th of September.
Nice.
I think that's the Saturday and Sunday. Whatever the Saturday and Sunday is that weekend.
Cool.
That's always a great event. We had 260 people sign up last year. We're expecting 280. And so, yeah, that is a great event. And we try to do a good job there and make sure everybody has a good time. So that's a good one to come in and check out.
Cool. Second question, anything else you want to plug? I mean, the big ones, New England organization, probably Tsunami Weightlifting.
Sure, yeah. I mean, New England Weightlifting, we're trying to do a good job. If you have any ideas, reach out to me and Travis Cooper 77kg on Instagram. We'll be happy to talk through those. If you want to get into weightlifting or compete, the WSO Championship still has registration open, and it will for a while. So, we do currently have a lot of spots, but we're going to have a spike in registration, and it will, almost most definitely sell out. So, as far as my own stuff, I do coach. I do remote coaching. I've been, competing for 20 years now, and have been coaching for over 10 years now, and have coached medalists at nationals and the junior and senior level. And so, always happy to coach other people. So I do, programming, weekly check-ins. I travel to most of the national meets. So whether it's myself or someone else within my circle, we get the competition coaching, which is really, really important. Sure. At the national meets as well. So that's available. I was running the podcast for a long time. Honestly, I just got 2 kids now. Got a million things going on. So really, that's been on the back burner. We haven't posted an episode in a long time. Sure. But that is something that I've done in the past that might post episodes in the future. So.
Cool. And then last question, that favorite quote, mantra, or saying to put on that billboard?
Yep. My favorite quote is, "Learn to be happy with what you have while you pursue what you want." All right. Cool. So you should never be like, it's basically like contentment. It's important to be content with your life, and you are probably more blessed than you give yourself credit for. If you look around, there's a lot of people in certain areas that are not as accomplished as you. I could focus on Olivia Reeves or somebody like that and be like, wow, I never got to do those things and focus on that negative. But then there's tons of people who would love to be where I got to in the sport. And so you have to be happy with the blessings that you've received and the things that you've gotten to do in life. And it's not just in weightlifting. Sometimes people are more accomplished in one area, but then you look and you say, hey, this person's accomplished more in weightlifting, but I have a family and a full-time job, and I'm doing different things. And so in that concentrated area, they seemingly have it all, but I wouldn't necessarily trade my life there. And I think everybody should feel that way. You should feel like you don't want to trade your life for anyone else's and try to figure out how to get to that point. But also at the same time, you need to pursue the things that you want with intention. And so, yeah, that's why it's my favorite quote. There's always more to pursue, but in the moment, you should be happy with where you are.
Love it. I think that's an important quote for a lot of people. That's really good. Cool. Well, awesome. We'll mic drop with that. Rhody Strength signing off. Thank you so much. And
Thank you.
All right, signing out.